Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Talking Devils, the leading independent Manchester United podcast. I'm Paul, and this is the United Before Fergie podcast. Now, before we get started, and I introduce the guest this evening, there are many players that epitomise what Manchester United is all about, that you cut them open and they've got United through them. One of those names that comes up many, many, many times is a man called Brian Greenhoff. And this evening's podcast is dedicated to Brian. So I'd like to welcome his son, Brian Greenhoff Jr. Hi, Brian.
Good evening.
Evening. And huge Red, long-time Red, lifelong Red, should I say, Sue? And a bigger Brian Greenhoff fan you will not find. Good evening, Sue. How are you?
Hello.
Hi there. But if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, you're watching it live, please subscribe, like and leave comments for us. If you're watching this on the follow-up, hello. And you can catch us on the audio podcast of your choice, which will be uploaded at some point in the next couple of days. So, Brian Greenhoff, where do you start with someone like Brian Greenhoff? We spoke about this a little while ago, Sue. In my head, or certainly not just in mine, but in many supporters, underrated is an expression that comes up an awful lot when it comes to Brian, but he epitomised something about the United spirit. Sue, what was it about Brian that just drew you to him? What was it?
Well, he gave his all. He gave 150% every game. I mean, he loved United through and through. And it came through on the pitch.
And I think that came across anyone who interacted with him on Twitter, where he was actually very funny. He was very funny on there. But his
straight talker.
Oh, well, 100%. I mean, his love for United was so obvious. I'm not going to say his hatred for others, because I think that's a little bit harsh. But he didn't suffer fools gladly. And I do just want to digress for just a second, if I can. When I started the United Before Fergie Twitter page, Brian was the first ex-Red player from a player's perspective that understood it and got it. And I've said it 1,000 times on the social feeds, but I will be forever grateful to Brian for just grasping it and really helping to grow the pages and just the fact that he understood exactly what it was all about. And I think he appreciated the fans as much as the fans appreciated him. Brian, would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah,
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think he loved interacting through Twitter. So it gave him an opportunity, really, because obviously where we lived in Northern Village, just in Rochdale, he had his friends and all of that. And, people would speak to him about football all the time. But actually Twitter really broadened his horizons to a wider fan base, and also, a lot of people who would have obviously watched him play, a lot of people who had pictures perhaps he'd not seen for God knows how many years of him playing or whatever, and stuff I still see today on Twitter when whenever there's like a tribute day or something like that. So I think it's fair to say that Twitter was brilliant for him. He absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it's a real testament to Brian and the players he played with, that we're still talking about him, when his career ended 40 some odd years ago, and he's still hugely revered and hugely popular amongst a section of United support. And there just seems to be, when we spoke with Sammy McElroy a few weeks ago, there seems to be that 70s era, although the trophy count wasn't huge, there was just something about United at that time that the fans could relate to, that these players were massively popular then. And to still be hugely popular now is a real testament to this kind of what they gave, the effort and they gave out on the pitch. And like you said, Sue, 150% every game, win, lose, draw, left it all out on the park. It's just amazing that we're still talking about these guys 40, 45 years after that team ended. And I think that will carry on forever, as long as there are people that can talk about these things, and the younger ones that perhaps remember it through their fathers or through their uncles and brothers and bits and pieces. That will never end, and it's just a fantastic era to talk about. Now, obviously, you were born in Barnsley. Big Tommy Taylor fan, or Tommy Taylor inspired him to come to United. What was it? Do you know, Brian, about Tommy Taylor that he liked so much? Was it the fact that he played for United, or because he was a Barnsley lad and big hero, and what he achieved? Obviously, it was cut short prematurely.
Yeah, well, I think if you put those two together, that's exactly what encapsulated my dad's sort of thoughts on Tommy Taylor and United. So, and he was a great Tommy Taylor as well, weren't he? So
amazing,
absolutely. So I think when you put those two together, a Barnsley man, Barnsley lad playing for the biggest club in the world, then it's hard not to have that as your hero.
Yeah, Sue.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah,
he's a smiling assassin.
He was, and he will be a subject of a future podcast. Now, he joined United in August 1968, so 3 or 4 months after the European Cup win. He didn't make his debut until September 1973, so 5 or 6 years later. He joined, or he made his debut at the right time. That was against Ipswich, but then relegation. So we've got to talk about the relegation season, and it's a season that many United fans go second division, but what a season! And Brian played a massive part in that. So,
but Brian, even though we went down, Brian was voted the supporters' player of the year.
Yeah, his value to the team was just enormous. So Brian, when they mentioned about that relegation season, was it in what a cracking season it was, or in the second division? What was his viewpoint on it? Do you remember?
I think it was Jim Moulton who got injured, weren't he? And I think that was quite a big for the team. But I think not so much around what my dad talked about. It was the year after he wanted to talk about more, bouncing back and coming up. And funnily enough, some of my wife's family, they all followed that United team, and they were some of the best away days they'd ever had. People going home away every single game. There'd be thousands and thousands of people all over the place they were. And I think that for me was, you talked before about, the 70s team being revered and obviously well loved. I don't think there's many football clubs that can have a relegation and then a bounce back and then go to 3 cup finals and have the fans who still revere him despite the relegation.
Yeah, and so you were mentioning that during that season where they were playing the second division, you visited some interesting places.
Yeah, home and away, dives, falling down potholes.
But then that was the style of football in the 70s. And like I say, Brian got was it supporters player of the year that year. I guess when you look at some of the players he was surrounded by, so he had Martin Buchan, he had Stuart Pearson, he had Lou Macari, he had Sammy McElroy, he had some of those really iconic names for United, and came away after the season with the supporters player of the year. That tells you something about the quality of the man. And I know Wayne has put in the comments that Brian was a hero to tens of thousands of United fans. Yeah. To me, he was a man who changed my life. He really did, and I'll never forget what he did for me. I think, Wayne, we could probably all we can all mirror that. Now, one of the most iconic images of United through the 70s was your dad, Brian, after the 76 Cup final, with Tommy Dock in his arm around him. Did he say much about that? Did he, or was that something that he would rather have not talk about?
Only a couple of things that I remember. Number one, it was offside. So
I think we can agree with that.
Enough, we had the videos of all the cup finals, and you still watch that, and then we press pause and it'd be offside. If it was VAR today, we'd be drawing the lines on the TV and whatnot. And I think the other one was he had the losers medal which he, when he got back to his hotel room, it was one of those where, he throws it on the bed and said, next year I'll be having a winner's medal. And I think he was just adamant that was going to happen. And I think the doc instilled that, to be fair.
Yeah.
But, when you lose the way they did, then to bounce back and go and win it the way they did must have been unbelievable.
It was.
So you would have experienced that.
Yeah, it was.
What was it like? Did you feel the way Brian felt, or because I mean, you look at the picture now, he's just distraught and he's absolutely.
Yeah, I was the same. I think we all thought it was a foregone conclusion, and it was the first time I'd been to Wembley in a cup final, and yes, it was.
Well, United were overwhelming. Well, United were overwhelming favourites for that final, weren't they?
Yeah, that's it.
And Sammy McElroy touched on it, and he said, complacency. We just got a bit complacent, and that's the danger of a one-off game. But yes, Brian, it'll always be offside. I don't care how they.
And then, like the following year, we were the underdogs. So.
And let's talk about that.
Them winning the treble.
So the following year, Tommy Dock says to the United fans, "Don't worry, we're going to go back and win it next year."
No,
and that's exactly.
I don't think we believed him, but hey.
Yeah, why? What was it about that series you perhaps weren't too sure whether that was going to happen or not?
No, I think as supporters we didn't. We thought it was more tongue in cheek. I think, but.
Oh, okay. And I remember Brian got mad.
Probably it was our destiny to stop the Scousers winning the treble.
Absolutely, quite possibly. But we're not going to complain about that, right?
No.
So Brian got man of the match, I believe, or was generally seen as man of the match.
Yeah.
But I know that was one thing he was exceptionally proud of. Brian was his FA Cup winners' medal.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at it nowadays, it's probably the third trophy you look for in a season if you're in the Champions League and you're going for the league. But certainly when I was growing up in the 80s and that, the FA Cup was the one you wanted.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
It was always the showpiece event. And I remember when I was growing up, the cameras would be outside the team hotels at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was very much like that as well in the 70s, weren't it? So that was the big one. And then especially after the year before as well, and then who you're playing against and what Liverpool stood for in the 70s. Because I think, from what my dad used to say to me is that, Liverpool were the best team in the 70s, but the reality, United always used to give them a really good game and very rarely come away, getting beat. I think more often than not, they'd have positive results. So, to beat them at Wembley and stop them winning the treble and then right the wrong of the year before, I think was fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, over the past couple of weeks, Brian, I've asked the followers on social media to just give their thoughts and their memories about your dad. And I just want to read a few of those out if I can. So George Patterson on Facebook, loved watching Brian and Jimmy. Those were the days in the Stretford end. David Crowther pretty much mirrors what you said, Sue, that he always gave 100% and played for the badge, which is, as a United fan, that's all you want from a player is to leave it all on the park. And if you lose, you lose. If you win, great.
That's it.
But
as long as you're blind.
That's it. Stephen Norris says his first memory of Brian was as a 10-year-old seeing him crying on the pitch after the 76 Cup final. That made him a Red. So he says, thanks, Brian. Matt Gofton, I became a United fan in 76, age 6. Yeah, I remember Brian crying, played from the heart, and a very underrated player. The 76-77 FA Cup finals the most, but what a solid player. That comes across pretty much from everyone. How solid he was. There was barely a game where he did something wrong, and that really endeared him with the effort to the players. Martin Spencer, anyone at St Andrews in 75 when Bryant went in goal, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Sue, just as we were talking before we went live, and he was made up to keep a clean sheet with Gordon Banks being in the crowd. No pictures seemed to be about of him that night, only Alex walking off with the doc. Do you remember that particular match, Sue?
Yeah.
So did Alex get injured and he was like, right?
Yeah, he did get injured, yeah. Brian went in and
so Brian
he was happy to be a clean sheet.
I suppose he was just happy playing for United in any position on the pitch.
Wherever.
Yeah. Brian,
to be fair, he didn't. He played everywhere, didn't he? But he used to talk about that a lot. Yeah.
He played in goal and kept a clean sheet for United.
Oh, absolutely. Anything like that, or all his goals started off at 20 yards and they move up to 25, 30, 40. Yeah. Clean sheets were always touched on. So yeah, I think I can't remember. Was it Stepney who got injured? Did he break it? Did he do something to his shoulder or something like that? Was it?
I think so. Yeah.
I can't remember, but yeah, no, he was particularly proud of that.
But not many players will be able to say I went in goal for United and kept a clean sheet during a league match, and Brian was one of those. Some more comments. Bob Ackrey says he was allowed to leave too soon, and I know that was brought up in his autobiography that he felt he had so much more to offer United, but the manager at that time didn't fancy him. He had plenty of good football left in him. Andrew Binding says, interesting how Doc moved him from a midfielder to a centre-half. Great servant to United. I'm surprised it's taken this long for the chant to come up. The clap, 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 Greenhoff. And when he had both brothers, Greenhoff's here, Greenhoff's there, Greenhoff's every effing where. Great player, great bloke too. Many years ago, I spoke to him on the phone. This is Neil Byard, by the way, from a supporters club that his brother was at. And Charles Poulis said he was a good friend of mine. Met him and his brother Jimmy in Malta, became close friends. Used to go to his house in Urmston, and we used to play backgammon. He came to Malta a lot of times. Last time we met was at Sir Matt's funeral. Him and his brother, great, honest, genuine gentleman. To that kind of reveration, if that's a word, I might just made that up. That kind of reverence just really speaks volume of the type of not just the player, but the type of man that your dad was, Brian. I think that just about sums it up. He was so. I'm going to use the word adored because I know, Sue, you adore him.
Yeah.
And particularly, and following George Best as your idol that's no mean feat. The fact that he did that, but it's just testament to his character, I guess, and everything that he represented, Brian, that made him the hero to followers like Sue, supporters like Sue, and to a generation of United fans. So a few of the other comments that I've had are, which I'll come to in a sec. Now, goal scoring. He wasn't renowned for his goal scoring, but he scored some belters, all right. And the two that spring to mind are the chip over Ray Clements in the 1979 semi-final, and the goal against West Bromwich Albion on that memorable during the Christmas period in 1978 when United unfortunately got battered by a particularly good West Bromwich Albion side, but he scored an absolute beauty from the edge of the box. And he scored like 17, I think, in his United career in total. So what other goals can you remember that Brian chipped in with?
One down at Chelsea, I think there was.
Yeah. Do you remember any?
We were losing 2-0, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned Ajax to me earlier on. The game.
Oh yeah, he was definitely man of the match in that game at Old Trafford when we won 2-0. He got all the headlines for that. Right, solid. And another one I remember was the quarterfinals against Wolves in '76. It was an evening game. It was unbelievable in that as well.
Did he score in that one as well, Sue? Was it in the FA Cup, that one?
Yeah. So we got. Yeah,
in the games that you saw him, did you ever put a foot wrong? In what you remember?
Not that I can think of. No, I wouldn't say so. No.
And to do that consistently against some of the opposition, look at some of those players that he would have played against back in the 70s. Look at the conditions of the pitches that he played against. And the way, just the very, very quiet, very unassuming, but just whenever the topic of Brian Greenhoff comes up, it doesn't get people just no one's ever said a bad word about him.
No, you're right there. I never thought of it that way.
It's just amazing. But Brian, when he spoke about his career at United, what were his standouts? What were the parts that he would over and over and over again would talk about?
I think, well, look, the cup final definitely stands out. It also, he still would talk about the Southampton game. Not that the fact that it stood out. I just think that it was, for him, it just annoyed him. It was a missed opportunity, and you say he was crying at the end with the dot. We used to have that picture hung up in our house, which was.
Did you?
Funnily enough, I just remembered it before when he said it. I've never got to ask why. I think I'm gonna have to ask my mum why that picture. I think it was at the top of the stairs, but the Ajax game came up. We've seen that on video. Sort of all over the pitch, box to box. A brilliant game. I think that he absolutely loved that game. I think he always used to enjoy playing against. Wolves. That was my granddad's team. I think he scored at Molineux away in the cup as well. The one you mentioned before, Sue. So, but I used to, whenever we used to catch up on that, I used to ask things like, the training and the players, what they were like, and his roommates and that type of thing. But the question I always used to ask him over and over again is, what was it actually like, when you come out of that tunnel and the fans are singing your name? And I could never get my head around that because obviously I've never done something like that. And he used to say, he said it was an unbelievable feeling, and it gives you such a lift. And the players used to, run out onto the pitch. They used to stand in a line, didn't they, in the centre circle, and used to applaud the fans. And then that'd be that. Old Trafford would be bouncing, the atmosphere would be fantastic. They'd be singing the Greenhoff chant, and I think, it's things that I could talk to him about, things like that, really.
But, I know from when I interacted with him on Twitter, his pride at just having a chant was, for him, that was the payoff. The fact that he was, he was popular enough and loved enough to have a chant that, it could have gone one or two ways, to be fair, but that was all the love he needed, I think, from the fans. He knew the fans loved him anyway. I've got some other comments. Facebook. I know we're going to have a relatively short one soon. I know, Brian, you've got to shoot off very, very shortly. Yes, okay. We will come back to Brian Greenhoff in a future podcast. So we've not even scratched the surface with Brian yet, because I think there's so much more to his story than that. So some more comments. These are again from Facebook. So Graham Smith, very underrated player. My overriding memory of Brian is him crying after the 76 loss in the cup final, and the doctor consoling him. Susan Maligan Stranagan, I'm sure that's their own. 77 FA Cup, putting the Dippers in their place. Tom Killeen, this is a good one. Used to have a game with him and a few others in Gorse Hill Park. Jimmy Rimmer used to sit behind the goal, saying if Matt finds out we're playing, he would go bonkers. Great days. John Lawrence had a few brief conversations with him on Twitter. He said he was really nice, that he replied, and he put me right on a couple of facts too. I bet he did. Pryor says Man United through and through, and we've touched on this bit here, who has played his heart out for the club, was a big part of Tommy Dock's brilliant team of the mid-70s. Paul McCarthy said he played centre forward versus Rangers in that infamous friendly in March 74 and scored, of course. Chris McCauley, wholehearted professional. John Waldron, great servant for the Reds. Never forget his mazy run in the 76 semi-final against a star-studded Derby County team. Typical United, and probably what we're famous for. We were 2-0 up with about 10 minutes to go, but Greenhoff, instead of sitting back with the 2-0, he was going for a third goal. Brilliant club player who only gave 100% every game. Matt Wilcock had a pub just outside my hometown of Hayward, the Hare and Hounds up Norden. Top bloke, called in a few times. Martin Spencer posted a picture of him with Brian with his treasured 77 FA Cup final. He was a walking encyclopedia of United in the 70s and a lovely man. Stephen Melgi Merry said, got sent off at Carlisle in 77, the first player to be sent off for deliberate handball, and I never knew that. Harold Wigwam, that's a great name, crying after the 76 Cup final. There's a real theme there about, what an absolute legend he is. And legend gets thrown around so many times, so much these days.
Too easy these days.
But Brian has to be in there without a shadow of a doubt. That's, I know we've only really briefly touched on Brian in this particular episode, but I want to revisit it another time when we can talk about his international career. he only got 18 caps for England, ridiculously undercapped as far as I'm concerned. And just dig a little deeper into his career and everything else that goes on behind that. So Brian, sorry, hang on, let's go. Sue, sum up Brian Greenhoff in 3 words. Challenge, I know, but go on.
You can do it.
Oh, he just epitomises everything that should be in a player for United. That's more than 3 words.
that was more. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. 3 words was a challenge. I thought he was going to say I love him, but hey, we'll
I do. I think that goes without saying.
Yeah, and Brian, I want to leave you with the last thought on your dad about his love for United and the United fans' love for him.
I think you can definitely tell from the way my dad interacted with people that the fans were a massive part of him from a Man United point of view. Even after the games, going down to the pub in Urmston to see them afterwards and stuff like that. He would interact with them all the time. Didn't matter where. He'd always have time for people in that respect. His favourite subject was obviously United, and I think the one thing to remember, for us, he's just our dad, and he was brilliant at that too. And I think, it's 10 years next week since he passed away. So, it'll be a difficult few weeks for the Greenhoff family. But things like this are absolutely brilliant from our point of view. And every sort of photo that comes through Twitter, anything that you guys do, it always gets saved in our phones. And it's something that we'll always treasure. But the fans were massive from my dad. And winning the Supporters Player of the Year was, I absolutely guarantee it was one of his proudest moments.
Fantastic. And we will be doing a dedicated day to your dad next week, where we can hopefully talk about those good times and those good memories. So I think if we will revisit this. If you would be so good to come back onto another show in the future when we can pick this up and really deep dive into it a bit more. So Brian, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on, sir. And Sue, thank you very much indeed for your time as well.
Nice
so thank you very much, everyone. And
cheers,
you
Bob.
too.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. This has been the United Before Fergie podcast. Please like and subscribe, leave comments, and we'll be back next Monday with another podcast. Take care, everyone. Have a good week.
Cheers. Thanks.